When my stepmother Bridget looked me dead in the eye at my father's funeral in Portland, Oregon and said, "You were never his real child anyway, so don't expect a penny from us," I knew she was about to lose everything she'd spent 20 years building. The words hit me like a physical slap, cold and deliberate, designed to break what little spirit I had left after burying the only parent who'd ever loved me. The silence in Morrison and Son's funeral home was deafening. Even the funeral director's quiet movements stopped as everyone processed the sheer cruelty of what she'd just said over my father's casket. Her expensive perfume filled my nostrils as she stepped closer, believing her words were meant for me alone, not realizing I'd been preparing for this exact moment. That's when I pulled out my phone with hands that were surprisingly steady despite the rage coursing through my veins, showed her the voice recording app that had been running for the past 10 minutes, and watched the blood drain from her face as she realized I'd captured every venomous word. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air, but no sound came out. "Say that again," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the funeral home's silence like a blade. "I want to make sure I got it clearly recorded for the probate court and the jury." The blood drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint right there on the funeral home carpet. Even Elvis and Kiera, her children who had flanked her like bodyguards throughout the service, looked uncomfortable as they realized their mother had crossed a line they couldn't defend. But to understand why those 9 words destroyed her entire world, I need to tell you what happened 6 months earlier, when I first realized the woman who raised me was not just cruel, she was a killer. If you've ever been treated like an outsider in your own family, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now because this is just the beginning of the most satisfying revenge story you'll ever hear. My name is Catalina Cobalt, I'm 32 years old, and until my father's death 6 months ago, I believed that family loyalty meant something sacred. I was catastrophically wrong. My father, Nicholas Cobalt, was a brilliant tech entrepreneur who built a fortune from absolutely nothing in Seattle's booming technology sector during the dot-com revolution. He'd started with a single second-hand computer in our cramped garage, working 18-hour days while eating cold pizza and drinking gas station coffee, building what would eventually become a multi-million-dollar software company. When I was 12 years old, still young enough to believe in fairy tales and happy endings, he married Bridget Morrison, a strikingly beautiful woman 15 years younger with perfectly styled blonde hair and 2 children of her own. Elvis, a sullen 14-year-old boy, and Kiera, a spoiled 12-year-old girl who already showed signs of her mother's manipulative nature. From the very first day she moved into our warm, welcoming home in Bellevue, Bridget made it crystal clear that I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a living, breathing reminder of his first marriage that she desperately wanted erased from existence. The change was immediate and devastating. Where once our house had been filled with laughter and the smell of my father's terrible attempts at cooking, it became cold and sterile, like a museum where I was an unwelcome visitor. For 20 agonizing years, I watched Bridget systematically poison every family gathering, every holiday celebration, every moment of potential joy with a calculated, surgical cruelty. She'd shower Elvis and Kiera with expensive designer gifts, Louis Vuitton bags, the latest iPhones, luxury vacations to Europe, while handing me discount store leftovers with the price tag still attached, cheap knockoffs that screamed afterthought. She'd plan elaborate family vacations to places like Aspen's exclusive ski resorts and the Hamptons' most prestigious beaches, complete with first-class flights and 5-star accommodations, then forget to book me a seat on the private jet or reserve me a room at the resort. "Oh, Catalina," she'd say with mock surprise, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "I must have miscounted. There's just no space left." Even worse, she'd tell my father I was too busy with my dead-end career, or probably wouldn't be interested anyway, when family dinners were planned at their mansion, ensuring I wasn't even invited to meals at what had once been my own home. While Elvis and Kiera were living off my father's generosity like parasites feeding off their host, I was working 18-hour days building my own technology empire from a cramped studio apartment in Capitol Hill. The apartment was barely 400 square feet, with a Murphy bed that I rarely used and a kitchen so small I could touch both walls simultaneously. But it was mine, bought with my own money, and every line of code I wrote there was a step toward independence. While they were partying their way through expensive colleges on his dime, Elvis at Stanford studying business, while mostly studying beer pong, and Kiera at NYU supposedly majoring in art history but actually majoring in Instagram influencer culture, I was coding until my eyes bled and my fingers cramped, living on ramen noodles, energy drinks, and pure determination. Some nights I'd fall asleep at my desk, waking up with keyboard marks pressed into my cheek and my neck twisted in agony. While they were taking luxury vacations to Europe and the Caribbean, posting Instagram photos of their privileged lives with captions about being blessed and living their best life, I was reinvesting every penny back into my software development company. Every dollar I earned went toward better equipment, hiring talented programmers, and developing the cybersecurity software that would eventually revolutionize how Fortune 500 companies protect their data. By the time my father got sick with pancreatic cancer, a diagnosis that hit our family like a meteor impact, sudden and devastating, my company, Chemtech Solutions, was worth $47 million and growing rapidly. The irony wasn't lost on me that while they saw me as the family failure, I had quietly built something worth more than my father's entire estate. But I kept completely quiet about my success, wearing the same old clothes, driving the same battered Honda Civic I'd had since college, living in the same tiny apartment. I'd learned early in life that showing any achievement, any success, any sign that I might be thriving only made Bridget more vicious toward me, so I let them all think I was still the struggling daughter who desperately needed Daddy's financial help to survive. The deception was exhausting but absolutely necessary. I needed them to underestimate me completely for what I was planning. The last 6 months of my father's life were absolute hell on earth, a special kind of torture designed to break my spirit completely. Bridget controlled everything with an iron fist, his medications down to the exact milligram and timing, his visitors and how long they could stay, his medical care and which doctors he could see, even his daily schedule down to when he was allowed to use the bathroom. The control was suffocating, totalitarian in its completeness. She moved him from our family home, the house where I'd grown up and where every room held precious memories of better times, to an exclusive private facility in Redmond where she could monitor every single interaction he had with the outside world. The facility was beautiful, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but it felt like a prison designed by someone with expensive taste. I was allowed supervised visits exactly twice a week for 1 hour each, always with a hovering presence like a vulture waiting for death, always with a passive-aggressive commentary about how I was stressing him out, or tiring him unnecessarily, simply by existing in the same room as my dying father. She'd sit in the corner with a notebook, literally writing down everything I said as if she were building a case against me. Elvis and Kiera would visit occasionally for their Instagram photo opportunities, posting touching tributes about their amazing stepfather, with carefully filtered selfies and heartfelt captions about family bonds, while barely spending 10 minutes actually talking to him. But they made sure to remind him constantly about their future plans for the family fortune, discussing expensive cars they wanted to buy and European apartments they planned to rent, right in front of his hospital bed while he was dying. I tried desperately to talk to my father privately, to have one real conversation without Bridget's poisonous presence, but she had contaminated that well too completely. She'd convinced him over the years through constant, subtle manipulation that I was only interested in his money, that I was cold and calculating, that I only visited because I wanted his inheritance. 3 weeks before he died, I overheard Bridget on her phone with her attorney in the facility's hallway. Her voice was low but excited, and she was discussing legal strategies to minimize my inheritance, how to prove I was an ungrateful daughter who didn't deserve his legacy. That's when I realized she had absolutely no idea who she was dealing with. I hired the best private investigator money could buy, Alan Thorne, a former FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes and background investigations. His office was in a nondescript building in downtown Seattle, the kind of place you'd walk past without a second glance, but his reputation was legendary among people who needed the truth uncovered, no matter how deeply buried or carefully hidden. Alan was a compact man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see through lies like they were made of glass. When I explained what I needed, he didn't ask questions about my motivations or try to talk me out of it. He simply quoted his fee, substantial but worth every penny, and got to work. Within 2 weeks, I had a complete dossier on Bridget's life before she met my father, and the woman who presented herself as a grieving widow with pure intentions had a very different and much darker history than anyone suspected. The file Alan handed me was thick, meticulously researched, and absolutely damning. Bridget wasn't just a gold digger. She was a consummate professional at it, with a trail of bodies and insurance payouts stretching back over more than a decade like breadcrumbs leading to a house made of bones. Alan's investigation revealed that Bridget wasn't even her real name. That identity was just another carefully constructed lie. She was born Linda Marie Santos in a trailer park in Tacoma, Washington, and had systematically reinvented herself multiple times over the years, each new identity more polished and refined than the last. Before my father, there had been two other wealthy husbands, both significantly older, both healthy men with no history of heart problems, both mysteriously dead within 2 years of marriage, both leaving substantial life insurance policies that she collected without question from investigators or insurance companies who saw nothing suspicious about attractive young widows inheriting money. Her first husband was Thomas Brennan, a successful real estate developer in Portland who specialized in luxury waterfront properties. They married in 1998 when she was 25 and he was 52. Thomas died of apparent heart failure in 2001. Leaving behind a life insurance policy worth $1.2 million. Her second husband was Harold Mitchell, a pharmaceutical executive from Vancouver. They married 6 months after Thomas's funeral. Harold died in 2003, also of heart failure, also leaving behind a substantial insurance policy. This one worth $1.8 million. The pattern was unmistakable. My stepmother was a serial killer who specialized in murdering wealthy older men for their insurance money. Armed with this devastating information, I watched the final months of my father's life with new clarity and growing horror. Bridget's controlling behavior wasn't just about inheritance. She was potentially planning to make him her third successful murder, and she was being more careful this time, more thorough in her control. I began recording every interaction I had with Bridget and her children using a small digital recorder Alan had given me, disguised as a pen. I installed hidden cameras in the few areas of the medical facility where I was allowed to visit. I hired Alan to conduct surveillance on all 3 of them, documenting their activities and conversations when they thought no one was watching. Most importantly, I started building relationships with the medical staff who cared for my father on a daily basis, earning their trust and confidence so they would share their observations with me. What I discovered was absolutely chilling and confirmed my worst fears. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, my father's primary oncologist, confided that she'd been concerned about some of his symptoms that didn't align with his cancer progression. His heart irregularities were becoming more pronounced, despite his heart being healthy just months before. She'd recommended additional cardiac testing, but Bridget had refused, claiming it would be too stressful for him in his condition. The nursing staff also shared troubling observations when I spoke with them privately during shift changes. Bridget brought my father special meals and supplements, insisting on preparing everything herself in the facility's kitchen rather than trusting the professional dietary staff. She was extremely protective of his medication schedule, often administering pills personally rather than allowing the trained nurses to do their jobs. Most telling, his symptoms always seemed to worsen significantly after her visits, particularly after meals she'd prepared. I knew exactly what was happening, but I needed irrefutable proof before I could act. So I waited, documented everything with meticulous care, and prepared for the confrontation I knew was coming. 3 weeks before my father died, he had one of his rare lucid moments when Bridget wasn't hovering over him like a vulture waiting for carrion. The medication had cleared from his system temporarily, and his eyes were sharp and focused for the first time in weeks. He called me to his bedside in the ICU at Swedish Medical Center and whispered something that changed everything. "Catalina, I know what she is. I've changed my will. Everything goes to you." 2 days later, he was dead, another victim of Bridget's methodical murder spree. The funeral took place on a gray October morning at Morrison & Sons Funeral Home in southeast Portland, the same establishment that had handled her previous husband's services, a detail Alan had uncovered that made my blood run cold with its implications. The service was small, thanks to Bridget's systematic isolation of my father from his friends and business associates over the years. I stood in the back wearing a simple black dress from Nordstrom, my father's favorite color on me, watching Bridget perform her widow's grief for the handful of attendees. She wore a dramatic black Armani ensemble complete with a designer veil that probably cost more than most people made in a month, dabbing at completely dry eyes with an antique lace handkerchief that had belonged to her first victim's mother. Elvis and Kiera flanked her like bodyguards, shooting me occasional glares as if my very presence was somehow disrespectful to their mother's theatrical performance. After the service, people began filing out, offering their condolences to Bridget while barely acknowledging my existence. I waited patiently, my heart beating steadily despite the magnitude of what was about to happen. I knew this conversation was inevitable. She wouldn't be able to resist one final twist of the knife, one last moment of cruelty to savor. Bridget approached me as I stood beside my father's casket, her children trailing behind like obedient soldiers following their commander into battle they thought had already been won. "Catalina," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy that made my skin crawl like insects. "I know this is difficult, but we need to discuss practical matters regarding your father's estate. Your father left everything very clearly organized," she continued, her voice gaining confidence as she moved into familiar territory. "The house in Bellevue, the business interests, the investment portfolios, they're all structured to take care of his real family." Elvis stepped forward, puffing his chest like the spoiled child he'd always been despite being 28 years old. "Dad made it crystal clear that the business should stay in capable hands," he announced with ridiculous pomposity, despite never working a single day in his entitled life. That's when she stepped closer and delivered the words that would destroy her. "You were never his real child anyway, so don't expect a penny from us." Like this video if you think she deserved what's coming next, because what I discovered about Bridget's past is going to shock you to your core. The words hit like a physical blow, not because they hurt emotionally. I'd heard worse from her over the years, but because they were so perfectly, legally damning. The silence in that funeral home was absolutely deafening. Even the funeral director stopped his quiet preparations to stare at her in shock. That's when I pulled out my iPhone, opened the voice recording app that had been running for the past 10 minutes, and showed her the screen with the timer still counting. "Say that again," I said quietly. "I want to make sure I got it clearly recorded for the probate court and the jury." When Elvis lunged toward me, trying to grab my phone, I stepped back smoothly. "Touch me, and I'll add assault charges to the lawsuit," I said calmly. "Try to take my phone, and I'll add theft." That's when I decided it was time to reveal who I really was. You want to know what's really funny about this entire pathetic charade? You think I'm the poor, struggling daughter who desperately needs daddy's money to survive. I pulled out my phone again, showing them my company's valuation. "This is Chemtech Solutions. $47 million. That's what my company is worth as of yesterday's market closing. I own 73% of it outright. No debt, no partners, no outside investors." Their faces went completely white as they processed the numbers. "I've been building this empire for 8 years while you were partying through college. While you were taking luxury vacations on Dad's credit cards, I was working 20-hour days in a garage in Capitol Hill." But revealing my financial success was just the opening move in this chess game. You want to know what else I've been doing while you were spending Dad's money? I've been investigating you, Bridget. All of you. But especially you. I pulled up Alan's comprehensive investigation report. Thomas Brennan. Married to Linda Marie Santos. That's your real name, isn't it? From 1998 to 2001. Died of apparent heart failure, leaving behind $1.2 million. And then there's Harold Mitchell. Husband number 2. Another mysterious death, another massive life insurance payout. Bridget's hands started shaking visibly. Both had traces of digitalis in their systems when they died. A heart medication you had access to because of your work as a pharmacy technician. "You're a serial killer, Bridget," I said matter-of-factly. "And I have enough evidence to prove it in court beyond any reasonable doubt." But I wasn't finished destroying them yet. I still had Elvis and Kiera to deal with, their own secrets to expose. "Elvis, did you really think I didn't know about your gambling debts? $75,000 to some very unpleasant people in Las Vegas? Money you embezzled from Dad's business accounts to pay off your bookies." Elvis went white as fresh snow. "Alan found the altered accounting books, the forged checks, the fake invoices you created to cover your tracks. That's embezzlement, Elvis. That's a federal felony with a mandatory prison sentence." I turned to Kiera, who was crying but now looked terrified as well. And Kiera, your cocaine habit is going to be very interesting to discuss in federal court. Especially since you were selling Dad's prescription medications to pay for your drugs. That's trafficking controlled substances, sweetheart. Both of them were staring at me in complete horror, finally understanding that I held their entire futures in my hands and could crush them as easily as stepping on insects. Here's exactly what's going to happen, I said, my voice calm and businesslike despite the nuclear bomb I was about to detonate in their lives. You're going to transfer every single asset you've stolen from my father back to his estate. The house in Bellevue, the cars, the jewelry, the investment accounts you convinced him to put in your name. All of it. Bridget was shaking her head frantically. I can't. I won't. I interrupted smoothly. Because if you don't, I'm going to the Seattle Police Department with this evidence. I'm going to the FBI with this evidence. I'm going to every news outlet in Washington state with this evidence. I stepped closer to her, close enough to see the absolute terror in her eyes. I'm going to make sure everyone knows that Bridget Cobalt, grieving widow, is actually Linda Santos Mitchell-Brennan, serial killer who targets wealthy older men for their insurance money. We'll contest the will, Elvis said desperately, grasping at straws. Please do, I said, my smile returning. Because the moment you file any legal challenge, I'm releasing everything I have to the police and the press. But I had one final card to play that would cement their destruction. And there's one more thing you should all know. The will you've been so confident about? Dad changed it 3 days before he died. He left everything to me. You get nothing. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because what happens next is the most satisfying revenge you'll ever witness. 6 months later, I stood in the penthouse office of my expanded Chemtech Solutions headquarters in downtown Seattle, looking out at Elliott Bay while my assistant updated me on the final legal proceedings. The view was spectacular. The Olympic Mountains in the distance, ferries crossing the blue water, the city sprawling below me like a kingdom I now ruled with absolute authority. Bridget was in federal prison awaiting trial for 3 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence Alan had gathered was overwhelming, and with no money for a decent defense attorney, she was facing life without parole. The FBI had exhumed Thomas Brennan and Harold Mitchell's bodies, finding conclusive evidence of digitalis poisoning in both cases. Bridget's pharmacy records showed purchases of the exact medications found in their systems. Most damning of all, they'd found her detailed journals documenting her hunting methods and selection criteria for wealthy targets. Elvis was serving a 5-year sentence in federal prison for embezzlement and wire fraud. His gambling debts had been sold to collectors who were far less forgiving than the legal system. His cellmate was a former accountant who'd also stolen from his employers. They had a lot to discuss during their long days behind bars. Kiera was in a court-mandated rehabilitation facility after her 3rd drug trafficking arrest. Her trust fund was gone, her car had been repossessed, and she was living in a halfway house when not in rehab. The privileged princess had discovered what real consequences felt like, and it wasn't agreeing with her at all. I had sold my father's house and donated the entire proceeds to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, an organization that helped kids who had no family to protect them. I kept his business and merged it with Chemtech Solutions, creating a technology empire that now employed over 400 people in Seattle and had offices in 3 states. My phone buzzed with a text from Alan Thorne. Final asset recovery complete. Every penny accounted for and transferred. Justice served. I smiled, remembering that moment in the funeral home when Bridget had looked me in the eye and said those 9 words that destroyed her world. You were never his real child anyway. She was wrong about that. I was his real child. The only one who actually loved him instead of seeing him as a bank account with legs. Those 9 words had cost her everything she'd spent 30 years building and stealing. It was the best investment in justice I'd ever made. If you believe in karma and justice like this story shows, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories where the underdog wins, and comment below your own family justice stories.